Imagine this. It's been raining for 6 days straight. Not a drizzle. A relentless, bone-soaking downpour that has turned your world into mud. You have no roof that doesn't leak. No fire that will stay lit. No dry clothes. And a baby crying because it's cold. You are not in a horror movie. You are a human being 20,000 years ago. And this is just Tuesday. Welcome back, everyone. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now, because we're about to crawl inside one of the most brutal, least talked about survival stories in human history. How our ancestors survived not a single storm, but weeks of non-stop rain, with none of the tools we take for granted. No umbrellas, no waterproof jackets, no heaters, just wit, fire, and each other. And if this story pulls you in the way it pulled me in while researching it, drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from. I read every single one. Here's the thing most documentaries won't tell you. Stone Age life wasn't a highlight reel of mammoth hunts and cave paintings. It was, for enormous stretches of time, an exhausting negotiation with weather. Archaeological climate data from sites in Ice Age Europe shows that certain regions experienced extended wet seasons, where rainfall could persist for a week or more, driven by shifting jet streams and glacial melt patterns, utterly different from today's climate. For a modern human, a week of rain means canceled plans. For a Paleolithic human, it meant a full-blown survival crisis, and sometimes a death sentence. Picture a small band, maybe 25 people, tucked into a limestone overhang somewhere in what's now southern France. The rain hasn't stopped. The river nearby, usually a gentle trickle, is now a churning brown monster eating away at the bank, just meters from where children sleep. Firewood is non-existent. Every branch within reach is soaked through. The smell of wet fur, wet earth, and smoke that won't quite catch fills the shelter. This wasn't rare. This was recurring reality, and yet they survived. Not by luck, but by an almost engineering-level understanding of their environment that we're only now beginning to fully appreciate through modern archaeology. Here's a fact that surprises most people. Stone Age humans were master fire chemists long before chemistry existed. Excavations at sites like Clayce's River Caves in South Africa reveal fire pits with a very specific, layered structure, a base of easily flammable tinder fungus, dry grasses stored deliberately away from moisture, and even birch bark, which contains natural oils that let it burn even when damp. Some groups literally pre-stockpiled emergency fire kits during dry spells, anticipating exactly the kind of week we're describing right now. Think about the psychology of that for a second. That's not animal instinct. That's forward planning. That's a brain capable of imagining a future problem and solving it before it happens. In many ways, that mental leap, preparing today for tomorrow's storm, is the same cognitive skill that lets you check the weather app before leaving the house. The tools changed. The thinking didn't. But surviving the rain wasn't just about fire. It was about geometry, geology, and something surprisingly modern: teamwork under stress. Shelters weren't randomly chosen. Caves and overhangs were selected based on drainage slope, wind direction, and elevation above flood lines. Decisions passed down orally, generation after generation. Essentially an unwritten engineering manual carried entirely in human memory. And this is where the story gets emotional. Because surviving a week of endless rain wasn't just physical. It was psychological warfare against despair, boredom, fear, and the creeping sense that the sky might never clear again. How do you keep 25 people from panicking, from turning on each other, from losing hope, with no phones, no books, no light? So how did they actually hold it? Together, mentally and physically? Through days of unrelenting rain? The answer lies at the intersection of neuroscience, anthropology, and something researchers now call cooperative resilience. Let's start with the body. Prolonged cold, wet conditions are a direct threat to survival through a process called hypothermic drift, where core body temperature drops slowly enough that a person doesn't even realize how dangerous their condition has become until it's critical. Modern cold exposure research, including studies published in the Journal of Thermal Biology, shows that wet skin loses heat roughly 25 times faster than dry skin exposed to the same air temperature. For Stone Age humans without waterproof materials, this made staying dry not a comfort issue, but a life-or-death metabolic battle fought every single hour. Their solution? Layered insulation using materials most of us would never consider. Analysis of tool marks on animal hides from sites across Ice Age Europe shows evidence of hide-softening techniques using animal fats and brains, a process that made leather naturally water-resistant. Centuries before waterproofing was a marketing term. Some groups even used moss packed between hide layers as an early insulating buffer, functioning almost like Stone Age thermal wear. Now here's a question for you. Take a second and actually think about this before I answer it. What do you think was the single greatest killer during extended wet weather? Periods in the Paleolithic? Was it starvation, hypothermia, or something else entirely? Drop your guess in the comments. I'll tell you if you're right by the end of this section. The surprising answer, according to bioarchaeological studies of skeletal remains, is infection. Prolonged dampness led to skin breakdown, untreated wounds, and respiratory illness, problems that could fester for days, without any way to dry out, disinfect, or rest properly. This is one of the lesser-known pressures that shaped early medicinal knowledge. Evidence from sites like Shanidar Cave in Iraq shows Neanderthals using specific plants with documented anti-inflammatory and antimicrobial properties. Yarrow, chamomile-like species, suggesting a working, empirical pharmacy passed down through observation and trial, long before anyone understood germs. But the truly fascinating part isn't physical, it's psychological. Anthropologists studying modern hunter-gatherer groups, like the Hadza in Tanzania, who still experience extended rainy seasons, have observed something remarkable. Storytelling and social bonding spike dramatically during prolonged confinement. Enclosed, high-stress conditions trigger an increase in group narrative activity. Myths, songs, shared memory, functioning as a kind of communal stress regulation system. This lines up perfectly with cave art evidence from sites like Chauvet and Lascaux, much of which researchers now believe wasn't created in quick bursts, but during long stretches of forced inactivity, exactly the kind of week-long rain event we're describing. Boredom and confinement, in other words, may have directly fueled some of humanity's earliest and most extraordinary creative expression. There's a term modern psychologists use that applies eerily well here: enforced togetherness. Studies on isolated environments, Antarctic research stations, submarine crews, even pandemic lockdowns show that shared storytelling and structured group activity significantly reduce anxiety and interpersonal conflict during prolonged confinement. Stone Age humans, without knowing any of this terminology, were essentially running the same psychological protocol, tens of thousands of years before it had a name. So back to that question. What killed people most during these events? If you guessed infection and illness compounded by stress and exhaustion rather than dramatic starvation, you were right. Survival wasn't usually one single catastrophic failure. It was a slow accumulation of small vulnerabilities, held off by knowledge, cooperation, and an almost stubborn refusal to give up. Here's the truth that hits hardest once you really sit with this story. The people who survived those endless rainy weeks weren't the strongest, the fastest, or even the smartest in some abstract sense. They were the most connected. The bands that made it through were the ones who shared food evenly even when supplies ran low, who took turns tending fires through exhausting night shifts, who told stories to keep despair at bay instead of retreating into isolated silence. Modern researchers, studying disaster survival, from shipwrecks to wilderness emergencies, keep finding the same pattern our ancestors already knew instinctively. Social cohesion predicts survival better than physical strength in almost every prolonged crisis scenario. It's why survival psychologists today emphasize buddy systems and communication protocols in extreme environments. We didn't invent that idea. We rediscovered it. There's something almost poetic in that. Right now in your own life, on a bad week, job stress, bad weather, things not going your way, the ancient wiring in your brain that wants to talk to someone, to share a meal, to not go through hard things alone. That instinct is tens of thousands of years old. It kept your ancestors alive through literal weeks of relentless rain with no roof, no fire guarantee, and no certainty the sky would ever clear. Your brain still runs that same survival software. Modern climate scientists add an unsettling layer to this story too. As global weather patterns shift and extreme rainfall events become more frequent in various regions. Some researchers argue that studying how ancient humans adapted to unpredictable, prolonged weather stress offers real, practical insight for modern disaster resilience, not just historical curiosity. The Stone Age wasn't just our past. In an odd way, it might be previewing challenges our future is bringing back around. And here's a surprising truth to leave you with. The people who endured that week of rain in a French limestone shelter, or a South African cave, or anywhere else on this vast, ancient map of human struggle, they didn't know they were making history. They weren't thinking about legacy or discovery. They were thinking about the next hour, the next dry branch, the next reassuring word to a frightened child. And yet, because they held on, because they cooperated instead of fractured, we're here. Every person watching this video, right? now is the living result of thousands of generations who refused to let the rain win. That's not just ancient trivia, that's your inheritance. If this story hit you the way it hit me while making it, do 3 things right now. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what's coming next. Drop a comment telling me which part surprised you most. And give this video a like so more people can discover this hidden side of human history. This channel exists because of viewers like you who care about the real, raw story behind who we are. And speaking of raw survival stories, next time, we're diving into something even more intense. How Stone Age humans survived not weeks of rain, but entire winters of near-total darkness in the far north, where the sun barely rises for months at a time. Trust me, that story gets even wilder. Click subscribe now so you're notified the second it drops. Until then, stay curious, stay warm, and I'll see you in the next one.